Accessing collections to advance education is an important subject and essential to needlework scholars. Although high-resolution pictures of needlework from many collections is increasingly available, there is only so much you can learn from one-dimensional pictures. Therefore, personal examination of artifacts is necessary. Needlework is a highly dimensional art form. In 16th and 17th century England, which is considered to be the Renaissance of embroidery, various silk, metal threads, precious stones, wiring, padding, and other materials were used to achieve raised work effects. This mid-17th century embroidered panel from Colonial Williamsburg Foundation employs many padded, raised, and other dimensional techniques of the period. The pull-out picture from the lower left corner of a horse employs several needlework techniques and many, many materials. The benefit of accessing collections and hands-on examination is the ability to study details not visible in stock photos. In this embroidered bookbinding from the Houghton Library at Harvard University, you can see that it is dimensional, but scale and height details are not able to be appreciated. In this second slide, you were able to see some detail of the stitching and the tiny seed pearls in the center of the Tudor rose. However, when examining the piece at an angle, you can better view the padded dimensionality of the raised work stag in the corner and the height of the cluster of the pearls above it. Here is an example of a Jacobean casket in the collection of the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco. This item is so fragile that even the museum staff no longer open the lid, and they do not have a description available for the contents of the box. However, it was made available to us to carefully examine the exterior and to take notes of the various stitches and materials involved to create this work of art. Even though there is significant damage and wear, it is an excellent study piece of dimensional needlework. We were able to photograph at an angle to show the dimensionality from the previous slide in increasing detail. Here, the figure of a lady is pulling back a needle lace curtain. The silk wrapped wire used to create her fingers holding the free-form lace drape, and the tiny seed pearl bracelet that she is wearing. Before we leave the study of dimensionality, I would like to share one of my favorite pieces of needlework. The 17th century embroidered picture in the collection of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation is a masterpiece in raised work stitchery. Although there is too much to cover in this brief presentation, I want to highlight the outstanding features that exemplify dimensional needlework and the benefits of in-person examination. Here we have a detail of the left corner of the previous slide. The orangery, or glass house, is in the foreground. Mica is used to imitate the glass. The detail of the inlaid mica is highlighted because we were able to move the picture so that the mica caught the light. This feature might not be visible or easy to detect if this were a static photograph. Here, the lovers' hands reach out to grasp each other. The wired free-form leaves practically jump off the page. Finally, we have an oak tree. The spotted caps of the acorns are worked in free-form silk detached buttonhole. The forms used to create the nuts are actual acorns that have been overwrapped in silk. Another factor of in-person examination is damage. Exhibits usually display the finest objects in collections. However, many collections house items in storage that, even though damaged, can yield excellent information for the scholar and definitely worthy of closer study. This black work koi from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation has lost much of its surface stitching, yet you can still see the outlines that make up the thistle and yields much information about the stitching, drafting, and other aspects that went into creating this piece. Another advantage of in-person examination is being able to see the inside of garments and examine the construction. An interesting case study is this little jacket at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. The needlework is from the late 16th century, but the style of clothing is ambiguous. It appears to be a child's gown, but when measured, the sleeves are too narrow and the gown too long. Additional information requires deeper investigation. Examining the inside of the gown, we can see the construction and wear points. There is no wear at the bottom, and it is partially lined. It is unlikely it could have been worn by a child, as the measurements for a child or even a baby do not follow that of a wearable garment. The theories of it being used for a doll or even statuary are put forward, but there is not any supporting evidence in particular. On closer examination, we can see that this was not a purpose-made garment. Garments made in this style of needlework were drawn out in their entirety, including all the filled-in patterns for the embroidery. All seams were planned for, and the needlework was oriented. From this artifact, we see that there is an awkward join in the seam, and there are two distinct patterns of needlework that, though similar, do not match. The garment is two pieces of needlework joined after regular use. In fact, one is distinctly a coif, or had been one at some point earlier. The picture of the inside of the garment, the edges are faced but not lined. More importantly for needlework study, we can examine the quality and type of stitching. There is an economy of metal thread on the back. There are few carries, and the quality of metal is good. Lower quality metal thread would be more susceptible to tarnish. The flat silk threads are messier than one would expect, and we can clearly see knotted beginnings and longer woven thread ends. The longer linen carries are the threads used to anchor the bullion chips of the spangles, a common practice. We can note from examining the needlework from the back that this was an accomplished domestic embroiderer or a proficient professional. The stitches are difficult but not overly complex. The backs are neat and efficiently applied. This little item was a fascinating study and has much to offer a probative researcher. The curatorial staff at MFA Boston were collaborative and interested to share theories and discuss possible areas of inquiry for more research, as there is no clear understanding on this specific piece of needlework. There is always something new to learn from even well-known items. Color is another important factor of in-person examination. Photographic reproduction does not always replicate accurate hue and tint, and regardless of accurate note-taking, memory is not reliable. An effective way to capture color is to match artifacts to an industry-standard color deck. This can be a painstaking step, but worth the effort. Being able to examine the underside or back of textiles can yield additional information. It can provide a look at possibly less soiled or damaged fibers that may be a closer match to the original color if the front is soiled, faded, or stained. This 17th century crewelwork fragment from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, is probably from a much larger suite of bed hangings. Turning a fragment over to study the back can be less risk for the artifact than a large or a shaped item that could suffer damage if manipulated. I have only scratched the surface of this subject in this presentation. Gaining access to collections provides the researcher with information that is not available via other means. Some of that information I've covered in this presentation. I hope this has encouraged those who are interested in the study of historical needlework to utilize museum collections as a resource for your research.